Okay. Pull this out. Okay, so one of the questions was how to correct loft errors. The lofting errors, or we talked about when it was twisting over each other, is that what you guys are referring to?
It looks disjointed, you know, it doesn't have that smooth transition, so it's kind of almost, you know, yeah, kind of twisting in there.
Okay. All right, I'm just getting this set up so I just have the contours. Turn it off, property. And I can make an overall selection with these layers. If I just want to turn all of these off, I just held my shift key down to select, just like a regular Windows window in Windows. Okay. So what I'll try first, now first of all, with this, I know with the way that I created these contours, I know that all of these lines end at the same plane. So if I go to the top view and I go down here, I know all of these curves here are right on that same plane. That's one thing that you want to make sure is the case with these contours. And if you're not sure about that, that's where you can go in and just trim it, right? So if you weren't sure about that, you can go in and trim it to that. Now with the line, you would have to actually create a plane or surface and trim it to that surface. So if I wanted to do that, I am going to extrude a curve straight. So right now it's going laterally, and I can go in and change the direction. So I just clicked on direction there. I want to go vertical. I know this is a vertical line, so I'll get a vertical plane. I think it was because of this. This little leg messed it up. So then I could move that wherever I wanted to and trim the curves. Let's go to my move tool. Now I can see all those curves are coming through there. I can go to trim, right click, and then I could start trimming these up. Now I think the reason why it's not trimming right to that is the curve has a lot of different sections to it. You just want to go in there and inspect to make sure that it's nice and clean. I'll go to top view, and I could also just drag this. It's not going to trim that because it doesn't intersect. So you want to make sure all those lines are on a perfect plane, right? Perfect vertical plane, so they end at the same area. If they start to move around a little bit, it's going to be hard to enclose that end, so you can complete it as a solid, right? But I already knew that that was good to go, so I'm going to Control Z out of that. And I'm just going to set this back to perspective. Okay. All right, so the first thing to do, we just try to loft some of these. Get this to be a little bit smaller. First I want to make sure I'm on my right layer. Looks like I'm on the right layer. Topography, or whatever layer you'd like to use. And I'm going to go into surface and loft. Now remember, if I select the curve in different areas of the curve, Rhino is going to take that into consideration with the way it's going to loft that surface. So for example, if I select this curve on this end and I want to loft it to this next contour up to the opposite end, it's going to factor that into the selection, most likely twist and do something crazy with the surface. So you want to be careful with how you select the lines, first of all. So I go into loft, 1, 2, I'm going to right click. Now it looks like it's okay. And I'm going to keep doing that until, and you could do multiples of these as well, but I'm going to keep doing that until I get something that seems peculiar. See, when I do multiples, and that looks like it's actually okay. I'll accept that. I'll right click to get back into loft. With these curves, I'm thinking something might happen there, so I'm going to take my time with them. And if there's an area that you can tell that's going to be problematic where it starts to fold over itself, one thing is to go right to the area and do just the selection to make sure that that's aligned in a particular way. So I know that I want that to line up with this. Those are looking decent. So I'll just keep going, and I'm just periodically checking to make sure that it looks okay. I think some of the issues started to happen over here, perhaps. I'll stay in this area. Right click. So there's something that happened that's a little bit weird. Now, there's a few things you can do with this. Part of it is just wanting to get it to be absolutely correct. See, it kind of folded under itself there a little bit. So that's because I didn't really have a good guide to tell it where to go. And this one actually seems okay over here. So I could try to loft it again to see if that'll make a correction. It may not. So I did the same thing. So that's a problem area. So what I'm going to do, and there's a lot of different ways you could kind of get through this. One thing that I've been having folks do, and it can be a little time consuming, is to really just break up those sections of that surface. I still want to loft or create it from edges, but I know that this is a problem area, so I want to isolate that. And any other areas that I think might be a problem. I actually think that might be okay, maybe over here. So So I'm just drawing a line from one to the next. Those are basically the segments that I want to create. In order to make those segments, I have to split both of these curves using the lines I just created. I know those lines are intersecting the others. So I can go into my split command, select the objects I would like to split. I want to split that curve and this curve. Cutting objects would be those lines I just drew. Okay, so now I can go here, and the surface command that I'll use for it, because I want to make sure it lines up, would be edge curves. Curve number, edge curves, there it is. So that's better. And I can do that along for each one of these segments. Basically what it's asking for are the edges of the surface that you want to create. So now I'm just piecing these together. As a smaller series of surfaces. Eventually I'll join them. I'm going to draw an edge for this. And then I'll go back into surface, edge curves. Let's see if this one just works by itself here. Same thing. Now the reason why I want to use edge curves too as opposed to a loft is I want to make sure that all these edges line up. Because if I just edge curve some of them and lofted others, there's a chance that the way it lofts could disjoint, and that's where you can get some failures for it as a solid. So once you commit to it as an edge curve, you have to do it for all of them. You may get lucky and it might work, but that's one thing where I could see it failing. Okay, so that seemed to work through that. So it took a little bit of time, but we got through it. Another thing that you could try, and I'm going to get out of all of that, go all the way back to before I split it, and before I could use those. The other thing that you could do that might be a little bit quicker if it's set up right is draw a line here. So I still have those same profiles that are there. I used those to split before, but now I want to use those to help sculpt the way the surface is going to be created. So I'll go into surface, and I want to sweep two rails. Basically, you can think about this as like a train, right? Train has a rail, and the train goes on that rail. Well, in this case, you have one curve that ends up being the rail. The other profile, what Rhino calls it, is going to move along that rail. And you can also have two rails, so then you can do that in three-dimensional space, right? So it's another way to create a surface. So I'm going to try sweep two rails. So now it's asking me for the first rail. Select this edge, curve, second one. So then right away it's looking for the cross section curves. So all of these that I created, I want to make sure I'm hitting those points. And then this last one. Right click. And it looked like that worked. So basically what I did, I gave Rhino more guidance to how I wanted that surface to be created. And of those two methods, I guess, you know, the quicker one is the sweep two rails. I can imagine that I'm going to have similar issues as we kind of go up, probably for these two. So where I think there may be issues, I can add profiles. And I'm just estimating where this goes or where this is. I know that this was a problem before, so I want to Make sure we get around that. I'll make sure we have this. These transitions can sometimes cause the problems. And then I have one on each edge that I know is going to be still on that same vertical plane, so it's nice and clean. Surface, sweep 2 rails, select the first rail, the second rail, and immediately after the 2 selections it's asking for the cross-section curves. And I'm selecting in the same area, again similar to the loft command. I don't want to risk this twisting. I don't think it would, but it's just a good habit. You can see that these rails are off, so I have to fix those. They're not touching. Sorry, those curves are off. So I want to make sure that I'm going from one rail or curve to the other. Alright, so I'll execute that command again. Sweep 2 rails. Cross sections. That got off again. Alright, I'm going to risk it and just go with this one. So that seems to help with that. And I think with these, in this area, what started to be a problem is right over here. It gets pretty steep, and that's where it starts to fold over itself. So that's where I'd go back and add basically a couple guides that can revolve around. I should have put some on the ends. I'm going to probably do this for the next 2. I'm just going to make all of the profiles right now. This might be an issue here. Ooh, what happened there? So we can see something happened there with that other one, so that has to be redone as well. That's what was wrong. This curve wasn't touching. I don't know what's going on with my near command, but if I hit F10 up on top, one of the function keys, what comes up for curves or surfaces, not polysurfaces, but regular surfaces, are what are called control points. And so when we're adding, like with the patch command, if you're adding more ISO curves to a particular surface, basically you're also adding control points. It starts to become a lot more, you can manipulate it a lot more than if it had just points at each corner, for example, right? Same is true for curves. This just has 2 points, one at either end. I just want to make sure that that's touching. So again, F10 will bring the control points on if you have something selected. That's true for this as well. If I hit F10, we can see all the control points that were created. And if I wanted to, this is an aside, you guys don't have to do this, but I just want you to know that it's there. I could select a group of control points . I'll go in front. And I could start to warp that image, just to kind of work with it almost like clay. So in the more points, it's going to be more specific to those movements. Sometimes you want more movement, sometimes you want less. So F10 will get you those points. And we could, later on, it's a little bit more advanced. If you have a surface that has a set amount of points, you can also rebuild it to either be more simplistic or more detailed in terms of control points. So that's what I used to connect that, and that's why that surface failed. because it dipped down below there. This I'm just going to delete. And I'm going to go ahead and add the others while I'm here. And I'm doing this one command after the other. If I just clicked on those points within the single curve command, it's going to create a polyline, right? All those segments will then be connected. I don't want that because I want to be able to rail the segments along those two rails. So I want to make sure I'm going through the command fresh each time. So I'm right-clicking, selecting my 2 points. Wow, that is really a problem. And I have the object snap near, sometimes what gets in the way, and I think why it's doing that, not always connecting, is the intersection. Sometimes it's like an inferred intersection. So if you have two lines over each other and you want to draw a line from the intersection of those, it'll find that, but obviously that's in Z-space, right? So I think that's why I was doing that, was picking up on the intersection. And I'll make sure I have curves here. Okay, so I'm going to go through surface, sweep two rails, profiles,
Those of us that have already lofted our topography and we want to preserve a command to unloft a certain section.
unloft a section.
Yeah, so like, let's say right below your cursor there, you didn't like the way it lofted, and then you go back and tell it to unloft it, I guess.
You just delete it.
Just click on it and delete it.
Yep. Yeah, just delete it and start over. Or Control Z. Get rid of the last command. That's looking decent. I'm just gonna make sure right now I'm rotating more towards like the center or something, or somewhere in here in terms of my view, so I'm gonna go into the zoom selected so I can have better movement here. Sweep two rails. First rail, second rail. Oops. I have a tendency to hit enter or right click right after I hit both of the rails, which brings me out of the command. But that's just me. Right click. That's looking decent. So I'm going to try to loft these, see what happens. It's not as steep as the others. Well, see something weird happened there. So I'll create some profiles and I'll sweep two rails again. I'm just going to add another one here. Okay, sweep two rails. 1, 2, profiles. know, there's a little bit something happening right here. I could go back and add more, but really the way these are going to be stacked, I'm not going to worry about that small of an error. Want me to turn off my phone? Okay, sweep 2 rails again. I'm going to try loft. See if we get lucky. So it's still kind of getting weird over here. Especially if you know you're not working in that area. You know, I know some of this is about, wanting to expedite some of this. So yeah, I could go back and I could do the rail, sweep 2 rail again, but I'm guessing that's not going to be in the model anyway, right? So I just really want the poly surface. This last one, I already created, so I have an edge right here. I have the other edge there, so I can just try to use surface edge curves. Okay.
Why are some of them black and some of them gray?
It's the way the way that Rhino's understanding how those surfaces were made. So each surface has its own like orientation pattern that you can adjust. It's called UV. It's like XY, but for a surface. So if you have one surface, this may have one UV. You have another surface, it may have a different one. And I believe that's Rhino's just showing you that those are different. So it's slightly off. It's on the same layer and everything, but it's slightly off. So if I'm going to turn off contours. So once I go to join all of these, so I just selected this. I'm just making selections right now, holding down my shift key. And I can type in join or use this icon. Now it should be most likely all the same shade. So once I joined it, that shading actually should be corrected because now it's all one poly surface and it reoriented the UVs. Okay, so we're going to need a base for this. So I'm going to create the bottom right now. I'm just going to concentrate on this left half. And I'm going to go into surface edge curves. I could also use planar curves because they're all on the same plane, the base plane. Either one would work. Hopefully you guys are getting used to this selection menu. If it's confused about what it is you're trying to select, you can obviously toggle through that and it'll highlight if you want to, which selection that it's referring to, or you can just select none. So there we have the base. I'm going to make the back quick because that'll be easy. And for that, I could extrude this bottom curve up to that particular height. I could sweep 2 rails, one side to the next. Any number of things that you can use. For this, I think I'm just going to use this surface from 3 or 4 corner points in space. Because I know that these are all lined up already. The model's pretty clean. So we have that. Now we have to close in the ends. Let me try one thing quickly. This may not work, but because this is so complex. I'm going to select all of these right now. I don't have the ends. I don't have ends to these yet. But I'm going to join all of those. So now it's all, this is all a poly surface. It's not solid yet because it's not enclosed. If you drew a pipe, for example, and it was open at either end, or if I draw a cylinder, I'll just go through that. I'm just using the these primary shapes here, primitives. I want to create a cylinder. It's asking me for a height. So that cylinder already gave me ends. So I just exploded it because I want to show you guys this. So perhaps you have an opening like this and you want to enclose that or cap that end. You can go into cap planar holes and it'll automatically give you and cap that off to enclose it and create a solid. So in principle, it should work with this, right? It may not because of the way we created, the way I created some of these surfaces, but it's worth a shot. It worked. So now instead of selecting the perimeters and everything, I know that's fairly enclosed, at least as it wraps around itself. Cap planar holes, I'll walk through that again. So again, similar to this cylinder, it didn't have this end, so this end is not capped. So under solid, cap planar holes, I just select that, right click, capped it for me. Same principle here, and it has to be perfectly planar, so that goes back to the model being nice and clean, because if it's a little bit out, it's no longer a planar cap, right? And it won't work. Make that selection, solid, cap planar holes. There we go. So delete that. So does that help with making some of the contours, lofting?
Can you backtrack on how to make the little lines to make it, it's like when you move your cursor over the line, it doesn't want to like snap to the line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for that I would use the, let me just copy this over. And I'm going to explode this and bring back my contours. So you were saying that these lines weren't connecting to the curves?
Right.
So you just want to make sure you can go up into your object snaps and make sure that you have, I was using near. So I know that that's going to go to that curve or the edge of a surface to the nearest point. What can get in the way is sometimes intersection. Perpendicular should get you there as well. So you have to play with those selections. Okay. Anything else up to this point that you'd like to make solid? Topography, just Boolean splitting. Is that seeming a little bit more clear on how to work through some of those? Okay. So Boolean split, you guys would like me to review as well? Where is the... Okay. So I'm just gonna turn off my contours. Those lines are there. So I want to make sure, I want to grab both the cage and the box. There's actually two layers. One is just the grid and one is the actual solid poly surface. So I'm just going to drag my window down that corner, make sure I select both. This one's kind of tucked in. And then I'm holding my shift key down. Do the same. I'll go to top. I just want to plow into this hill a little bit. Okay. So the Boolean split. Now I know this is already a solid, right? My contour, the base is already a solid. So that's, you want to make sure that you have that first. So you have to follow those steps to make sure it's an enclosed solid. Then I'll go into solid, and towards the bottom, there's union, so you can join these together. There's difference, so you can just keep the difference of the overlap of both of those, or actually it'll trim each other. Intersection, so it'll just keep the intersection of both of these. The one I've been asking you to use is Boolean split. Boolean two objects, so you can kind of go through different options. I haven't used that as much, but you're able to kind of click through some of the different options there. So the one I'm asking you to use is Boolean split. Select surfaces or poly surfaces to split. I want to split that. And I will right click to enter, select the cutting surfaces or poly surfaces. I want to use both of these boxes. And right click. So now it used those boxes as a cutting volume to dig into the contours. If you had a path that you wanted to carve in there as well, you could create another primitive to create that path and also split that out. So then if I select here, I'm not going to worry about those lines. I'm just going to move these up so you can see. I cut those in, and at the same time it's maintained itself as a solid. I am going to, let's see. Top. This isn't the exact measurement. I'm going to guess, but I'm just going to cut out a bigger area. Or wait, let me back forward, back up a little bit, back forward, and do this a little bit differently. So I'm going to create some primitives. I'm going to go to the top. One, this is would be the bigger base that you're working with, the 144 by 144. So I just clicked the corner to start, and now that's a reference point that Rhino will understand. If I just typed in 144 feet by 144 feet, it's going to take that as a coordinate related to 0, 0, 0, right? But I don't want that, right? I want it relative to this point that I just selected. So that's why I would type in the at symbol, and now I can type in 144 feet by 144 feet, enter. Enter. So now it gave me that base. Now it's looking for a height. So I could type in a height or I could do it manually. I'm just going to type in 25 feet. That's not quite tall enough. So I am going to scale this up a little bit. I'm just going to use the scale tool. If I hold down in this corner, there are different scale options. I can scale it 3-dimensionally, 2-dimensionally, or 1-dimensionally. I just want to scale it in 1 dimension. I want to scale it in the Z. So I'm going to select that. Select the objects I'd like to scale. I will select that object. Right click. Origin point will be the base. Turn my object snap on. This is the other reference point. And now I can just manually increase the scale of that. So this would be, let's say, the base. I'm going to create the area right around the interventions. And here I'm just going to make sure I get the area. You know, you may want more or less. It depends on the spacing of these that you've put together. I'm just going to get pretty close around these 2 interventions. And this will be that second layer. The height, I will type in 50 feet. Okay, so now I have 2 volumes that go all the way down to the base. So now I can take this other base that I just made and do the Boolean split to create my first base layer at the 1/8 inch scale, right? That I'm asking you guys to use. Solid, Boolean split. Poly surfaces I would like to split. I want to split that. Right click. Select cutting surfaces or poly surfaces. Going for the big one first. Right click. And it made that selection. So now I could take this and move it out. Now I could just delete this or move to the side or something. Now this, I want it to sit into that base, and right now it's sitting at the 0 plane, right? So I'm going to actually move it up to the bottom of where I know these cubes are, which is 6 feet. There's a few ways you can do this. If I just start dragging this around, I can just go off of the window here, out of the viewport, so I can free my hands up to type. The selection's still live. I can just type in 6 feet, enter, and now because ortho is already on, I can select whether it goes straight up or straight to the side or what have you. If it wasn't selected or ortho wasn't on, it would be around that radius. But I want it to go straight up. Now I know that the bottom is right at 6 feet. Matches up with that cube. And then I'll go through the Boolean split again. Boolean split. I want to split that. Right click. I'm going to use that to split it. Right click. There it is. So then that is my second layer. And I can delete that. You could still continue to carve into this surface if you'd like before you bring it into 123D Make or anything. That's up to you, but at the very least I'm looking for this. This topography is wasn't adjusted for the interventions, right? The elements that are going on to the site. So most likely you've already have factored, a plane or somewhere where a path could be and so forth. So most likely is already part of your model. But then I could do another Boolean split for this. Solid Boolean split. right click, first cutting object, two cutting objects. And now I have made a place for those models, those cubes, the interventions to be. And, you know, the way I did it, I guess I could have cut it all the way down as opposed to at the 6 feet. That would have gave this a base. So I might have rethought that. I think I was more leaning towards that than what I just did. Both will work, right? This will be, I can insert this in there, and then therefore then I can put the interventions in. So either way should work, but this would kind of work by itself a little bit cleaner. What else, guys? Other questions?